it is noon. So we're going to get started, and hopefully some more people will be joining us as we do. So welcome to today's program, Women in Agriculture, Taking a Seat at the Table with Confidence. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a great conversation planned for today. But before we jump on to that, I would like to introduce myself. There we go. So my name is Florencia Colella. I am a farm business management educator with MSU Extension. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am multiracial. And I have Dr. Melissa McKendry, Mary Dunkel, and Amber Eklund here, who have been part of this program's planning committee. I would like to ask them to introduce themselves a little bit if possible.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today as we celebrate National Women's History Month. I'm Mary Dunkel, and I am an extension educator located in Northeast Michigan. I have statewide responsibilities for agriculture literacy, and I serve as a product center business counselor, assisting entrepreneurs in food and agriculture ventures.
Great. Hello. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Dr. Melissa McKendry. I'm an assistant professor in the Agricultural Food and Resource Economics Department at Michigan State, and I'm also an extension specialist. So throughout my job, I specialize in livestock economics, production, and farm management. So I get to work with our awesome students here on campus and our agricultural stakeholders out in the state.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Eklund, and I'm with Greenstone Farm Credit Services. Thank you for joining us today. With Greenstone, I'm the public relations specialist, and so I get to help coordinate different sponsorships, partnerships, and events like today's event with different organizations that support and have a similar mission of Greenstone, which is supporting agriculture and rural communities.
Thank you all. Okay, so today marks the end of Women's History Month, and this year the Farm Business Management team at MSU Extension in partnership with Greenstone Farm Credit Services are offering this virtual panel discussion to reflect on women's contributions and roles in agriculture today and into the future. This event is part of the Women Shaping Agriculture initiative that also features a series of conversational interviews with women hosted by MSU Extension, where these women share their experiences and perspectives about Michigan agriculture. We hope that you check those interviews out on the MSU Extension website, and that today's meeting allows you to make connections and find encouragement with producers just like you. Just one more housekeeping thing. I wanted to show you our civil rights slide and acknowledge that MSU occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, or Dabwa, and Potawatomi peoples that was seated in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. We also will be recording the session, and we will be posting it online with optional English and Spanish subtitles afterwards. And if you want, you can also take a moment now to turn on or off the live automatic closed captions, which are turned on by default for our hard of hearing or deaf participants. I sent instructions on how to do this earlier today, so that might be helpful if you don't know how to. You also may enter any questions or comments you have in the chat box. We will try to address them all during our meeting today, but if we run out of time, we may send answers in the follow-up email, which, by the way, when you get that follow-up email, there will be a link to an evaluation survey, and we would really appreciate your feedback there. We also would love it if you would share your video as we have our meeting today, so we can see you, but you don't have to. And finally, I wanted to recognize that we are still living in a pandemic. Our office setup may be less than optimal in terms of background noise, interruptions, or poor internet connection. So I just ask that we give each other as much grace as we can. So let's move on to our show today. And Amber, take it over. Take it away.
Yes, of course. Thank you. So today speaking for us is Nicole Wilcox. And so she works with Greenstone, and she brings 15 years of experience in the agriculture finance field to Greenstone, and is currently our Vice President of Commercial Lending. And so her role, she works with some of Michigan's largest food and agriculture operations each day. Before Greenstone, she actually earned her bachelor's degree in accounting from Grand Valley State University. And after that, she completed the Advanced Management Education Program from the Premier Graduate School of Banking in Madison, Wisconsin. So before Michigan, she's actually from Parkville, Missouri. So she grew up around her family's crop and livestock farm. And then today, her and her husband, Keith, they have 3 children living in Portland, Michigan. So in addition to their full-time careers, they own and operate a hobby row crop in Sunfield, Michigan. So with her family background and her, finance knowledge, she invests additional time in these industries through participations, not just at Greenstone, but in various associations. So in 2019, she was appointed to the Farm Produce Insurance Authority Board of Directors by Governor Whitmer. And so today she still represents the interest of ag lenders in Michigan, and she's also a board director of the nonprofit West Central Michigan Horticultural Research organization. And so that is the research and extension center located in Hart, Michigan, that really focuses on the collaboration and research for fruit, tree, and asparagus growers in that area. So before I turn it over to Nicole and she starts with her presentation, Francia, if you could go to the next slide. I wanted to share just a little bit about Greenstone and how we're a member-owned cooperative and what that means. So a little bit about Greenstone. We are located our headquarters is in East Lansing, Michigan, and we serve all of Michigan as well as Northeast Wisconsin. And so we are pretty large. We have about 11 billion in assets and 25,000 members throughout all of those locations. We have 36 branch offices altogether, and like Florencia said, we're still operating remotely, which isn't ideal, but we're still able to work, remotely and serve our customers that way. We have roughly 550 employees to serve all of our members, and like I mentioned, Greenstone is a member-owned cooperative, which means we are owned by the people that we work with and the people that have loans and financing options through us. And so as a bonus and kind of a benefit to being a member of Greenstone, we return a portion of our income each year back to our members in patronage. And so to date, I believe 16 years altogether, we've been doing a patronage program. And so we've returned a total of $605 million in patronage over the years. And this year alone, which is actually Farm Credit's 105th anniversary, we actually were able to return $105 million back to our customers, and that was just earlier this month. So a great reason to work with Greenstone, in addition to our employees like Nicole, who have so much expertise in the industry and are so eager to help. So one last thing about us is that we do have a very diverse portfolio. We serve obviously agriculture, so anyone from a small beginning or young farm to people who have thousands of acres and would be a commercial farmer that Nicole serves. We also serve individuals living in rural communities, so we offer different vacant and hunting land loans as well as construction and home mortgages. And then we also serve capital markets. So a little bit about Greenstone. Nicole is welcome to fill in any details I may have missed. And if you have any questions, you can always contact myself or Nicole, or you can visit our website at greenstonefcs.com. So with that, Nicole, you're welcome to take it over, and you can go to the next slide.
Yeah. Amber, I think you did a great job. I don't think there's any holes that I need to fill. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for having me here today. I'm very excited and very appreciative to be here. I've spoken on this topic in some other forums, and I always love sharing my own experience and ideas, but more importantly, I really love just the opportunity to visit with others and hear others' experiences. And while I love that, with this pandemic, we found ways to still have these events virtually and do the best that we can to allow for Q&A and a chat box. It still doesn't completely, replace the connections that we gain from the in-person events. So at the end of my slide, I am going to provide, my contact information. Like as Amber mentioned, if you have any questions about Greenstone, feel free to contact one of us. But more importantly, if you ever have any, stories to share on your experience on this topic, or have any questions for me, I would love to be able to, have some conversations. So, like I said, this topic isn't necessarily new to me, but I admit that it's a really important part of my story that I haven't spent much time thinking or let alone talking about. And it wasn't until up until last year when I was asked to speak at another agricultural association. And in fact, at that time, I was asked to speak on a topic with a whole list of other speakers on women in ag, but my specific title was Women in Ag in a Male-Dominated World, Working Through Difficult Issues. And besides the fact that I lose my breath saying just the title of that presentation, I also just had an issue with the name of the presentation itself and the focus on male-dominated world. It really stood out to me like a sore thumb. I accepted that, for speaking experience on that one, but believe me when I say it didn't take long for me to suggest a name change. So what's my point that I'm getting to is, I don't want to be the one that dwells on the fact that at times females are statistically underrepresented in some fields. I like to be the one, and I try to be the one that twists that around to talk about the possibilities and the opportunities that it gives us and that we can bring to the marketplace, both in ag, but other areas as well. I do admit, I understand that this topic can be sensitive to some too. And I want to point out that I'm only speaking from my experience today and what's helped me, personally and professionally along the way. I'm not necessarily going to be focusing on, the underrepresentation of females in statistics. I'll leave that to the data experts and let them sway you however they want you to be swayed. So today, I'm going to discuss just some natural stereotypes that we face, kind of as a little icebreaker there. Francia, you can go to the next slide if you'd like. So we're going to hit on some icebreakers of stereotypes. I'm going to give you a really brief history of my time in the ag and finance field. We'll talk about some internal barriers that some of us face, including myself, and ideas that have been shared with me along the way to help me succeed in the workplace as a female, but then also just as a professional in general. Things that we talk about today, I really think it can be applied by anyone in the workplace. It's not really just females. And they had mentioned earlier, I want to take a brief minute. We do have the chat box in this session. And since we don't really have a live audience, and I feel like I'm kind of talking to my screen, please feel free to use that chat box to make some comments or add any questions to it. Somebody's going to be monitoring that, or we'll catch it at the end. So if you want to go to the next slide. So these are just little icebreakers and practice using that chat box to make sure they're working. But I figured I would start off with a small, game before we go deep into the presentation. I just want you to think about, when I say farmer, I want to know what you visualize. Now, given the name of this session and your reason for being here, you probably know what I'm going to try to get at. But what do you think the average person visualizes? The one that's 5 times removed, or even maybe 2 times removed from the farm. Feel free to use the chat box, but what are some stereotypes of farmers out there? And I see some coming in and they're going to make me laugh and I might get distracted. So, but you're right. As those roll in, I'm going to tell you about my research I spent here. I told you I'm not going to talk statistics, and I really meant it. All I did, I Googled farmer, and I just picked the first 5 pictures that popped up from my Google search. Francie, if you want to click and it'll start popping up. There we go. And I think from what I'm seeing, the comments coming in, they're kind of matching, my research that I've done. You can see the trend, they're all male. If you zoom in on the pictures, which I didn't take the opportunity to do, I'm pretty sure that weighted average age, is on the higher end as well. And if you go to the next slide, we'll just kind of go to another topic to throw out there. And this one's just really related a little bit more to my experience, and to throw a second one out there. But now, what do you visualize when I say banker? What comes to mind? What gender? Yes, suits, comb over. Yes, shiny shoes. These are good. What personalities, and I'm not going to take offense to any of it. So I'm here to break the molds. But same, again, I use the same research function. Thank you, Google. Too much cologne. I like that one. And I wasn't really surprised with what I found in Google, and they're kind of matching what I'm seeing come in as, thank you. I try to break the mold of not being boring. So if you, let's see if you can click on the next, and you can kind of see my search results from Google. It's pretty much in line with everything that you guys just said. And in summary, it's not just farmer and it's not just bankers that face this. It relates to so many different careers, agronomists, truck drivers, business owners, commodity traders. There's just a general perception that I think that we need to break through. And I also want to be the first to note that I understand men face barriers too, entering to certain career fields. There are just so many, molds out there that need to be broken. So, well, moving on to the next slide. Before we get into kind of the guts of the presentation, I was just going to briefly touch on my background, and really this is what's formed my foundation. On this slide, I just have a few pieces of information on Greenstone from an employee standpoint. The pie charts on the top, they represent Greenstone, the gender breakout in 2010 at Greenstone Farm Credit. If you look at the top left chart, it's actually pretty impressive, given the topic, that out of 443 employees, 64% of the employees were female. If you move to the middle chart, this is actually just looking at the management team. So of the management team, females only represented 39%. And then if you go one further to the right, this is the makeup of our board of directors. And at the time in 2010, we had one female representative, or 6%. Now moving forward to 2020 is the bottom row on this page. You can see how those things have changed over time. So Greenstone added almost 150 positions in the 10 years. As a whole, that female representation declined a few points from 64% down to 61%. But the slightly positive message here is that the management team, females represented in the management team, increased to 41%. And then to the very far right pie chart, you can see that we've also had an addition on our board of directors. We have now 2 females, or 12% female on the board of directors. And these numbers might not seem like a lot, but I should point out from that management perspective, our business model provides for small manager to employee ratios. So that means we really do have a larger management team. And even though that percent increase isn't much, by number, it does reflect a respectable increase. And I think closing that gap between females as a whole and females in management is a positive trend that we're seeing. But I still think there's opportunity, and this is just one example. I think that there's a lot of other opportunity out there with other organizations. On the next slide, just one more thing with my background. I'm just looking a little bit more from a micro perspective on my specific experience. I put this page together just to summarize the gender breakout roles that I've been on, the teams that I've been on since I started at Greenstone. So in 2006, 15 years ago, I started my first job with Greenstone. This chart right here that's up on the screen really represents my team at that time. It was a support function role working with an all-female staff. A year later, I decided on a career path within Greenstone's capital markets department. This department works with food and ag clients across the US, a little bit more corporate-like. See if you want to click on the page once more. There we go. So as you can see, at that time, I was the only female in a group of 8 relationship managers and credit officers. And to add on, I was also the youngest member of the team for a short period of time. And this was the case until years later, I became a manager myself and ultimately hired a second female. And then the third chart that's on here. So 9 years after my capital markets experience, I made a career change and became a loan officer in Greenstone's commercial lending group, where we work with food and ag clients across Michigan and Northeast Wisconsin. At the time that I started working with that team, I again found myself as the only female on a 12-person lending team, and also one of the younger, on the younger end of the group as well. Soon after, we did hire a second female who's still representing with me today. So, I bring this up. So while there's been some positive changes in Greenstone at that manager level position, I still think that there's opportunities elsewhere, that we can make. And we're going to touch a little bit on this later and what I think is driving, some of these numbers and statistics. So, moving on, earlier in my career, I had a great career coach at Greenstone that recommended the book called Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. If you're not familiar with Sandberg, she is the Chief Operating Officer of Facebook. Before Facebook, she was the VP of Global Sales and Operations at Google. I have read this book multiple times. I've listened to it multiple times. And each time that I've listened to it, I've been at a different point in my life, personally and professionally. And each time I feel like I've extracted more out of her message or something different. And I bring this up because a few of the ideas I'm going to talk about today really do stem from some of Cheryl's writing. She hits on some excellent topics about engaging with confidence. And I really highly recommend reading it or listening to the audiobook when you have a chance. So first, what I would like to talk about today is what we'll summarize as internal barriers. There are so many different internal barriers that I personally have faced, and I think others do. But I've tried to narrow it down to just these three on this slide. We'll talk about some of these internal barriers first, because I really think that we need to recognize them before we talk about ways to overcome them. So the first one that we have on the list is it's Imposter Syndrome, and Cheryl speaks on it in her book, and there's a lot of different authors and articles about this as well. But in general, females do tend to underestimate themselves, and they experience it a lot more intensively than men. We have a tendency to really judge our own performance worse than it actually is, which in turn, we tend to hold ourselves back. So Cheryl notes in her book that, at times, men seem to have a lot more confidence in the whole fake it until you make it, while women, while doing so, they really feel like a fraud in that moment. So I want to point out, overcoming this imposter syndrome, it's not something that's going to be fixed overnight. It takes time. It requires you to almost like reset your brain and your thinking. But what I would recommend is not wait until you feel confident to start putting yourself out there. Courage comes from taking risks and changing your behavior first, and then just allowing that confidence to build over time. Something that's helped me too is just continue to focus on your past successes. And this is really going to prevent that spiral of self-doubt that may form. The second internal barrier that I was just going to identify today is spectator versus participant, or spectator, kind of like sitting on the sidelines. Sometimes we let the insecurities get the best of us, but try to be the one to, be that active participant in the room and in conversations. Come prepared to the conversations, be willing to speak, be willing to listen, ask questions of others, clarify any uncertainty, and be that person that invites other people who haven't spoken up, help them engage. And remember that you're not always having to be the expert at the table. Remember that really the goal is to help the group in the meeting just be more successful. And then the third one I have on this page, it really does hit home for me. It's pleaser versus being respected. I have to remind myself that we're not always going to be liked by everyone. We do tend to be the more nurturing type. So sometimes this is hard for some of us. But you don't always have to be the pleaser. Those that are constantly trying to appease others are more often going to be the one that gets trampled on and less appreciated. Sheryl Sandberg, in her book, she shared a story about her experience at Facebook. And I haven't read the book in probably about a year now, but it's as if I read it yesterday. But it was at her 6-month performance review. Mark Zuckerberg had told her that her desire to be liked by everyone was what was holding her back. And he said, if you please everyone, you won't change anything. And that hit home. I think it's 100% right. You're going to be more appreciated by earning the respect of others. And that's going to come from making those good, tough decisions without trying to make every single person happy. So we can move on to the next page to kind of talk about, what can we do? Generations before us have been happy enough to take a seat at the table. Think of what they've gone through to get us where we are today. So let's not settle. Let's not just take that seat, but let's take that seat with confidence. First that we need to talk about is we need to overcome those internal barriers. I named 3 on the prior page, but there's a long list of from a personal perspective or a group perspective that I think that we could list off here. Personally, I think a lot of those internal barriers for me and a lot of people can really just come from those negative messages that we hear throughout our lives. It's wrong to be outspoken and aggressive. Names are later, you're kind of labeled with the name by being the outspoken female in the group. Women should be more powerful than men, but it's wrong to balance a successful career and a family. And we tend to lower our own expectations on what we can achieve. So I think that we have to get rid of these internal barriers before we can ever overcome any external barrier or just the perception of external barriers. I know it's not always the case, but I do see women that have held themselves back by just not having that confidence. When I showed you that overview of these male-dominated teams that I've worked with, they weren't male-dominated because the men were more qualified, period. But it's because, women have held themselves back from even applying. I've known a few females that have considered, some of those positions and ultimately decided not to. They were a little insecure, but probably more just unsure of themselves, unsure if they would be successful, worried about balancing career. One even told me that she thought she would have a full-time nanny, to make the switch. I've talked to men, some with far less experience than some of these females, and they were much more confident to put their name in the hat, and they weren't afraid to fail. So I know I've kind of expanded a lot on just this overcoming internal barriers, but I think it's really important. And if I can give you any encouragement at all, it would be to always do something when you're not ready to do it. When you hit that point of, wow, I'm not really sure I can do this, or I'm not sure if it's the right time, push through those thoughts. That's when I think that you really start to bust through your own internal barriers. When I made my career changes, I admit I was not 100% confident. I was stepping out of my comfort zone. I didn't think that I had the experience or didn't realize what I would be able to contribute in the new role. I was scared I would fail as an employee and as a mom of 2 at the time. But I pushed through those thoughts of self-doubt, and a lot of that came from a great support group that helped. I took the risk and it paid off, and I love what I'm doing. So that does lead me to the second bullet point of taking risks. At a young age, I felt like the need to be perfect and not be wrong. Whether I taught myself this or if it was pressured by my environment, I'm not really sure. But now that I'm a mother of 3, I'm really careful not to be overprotective, especially with my 7-year-old daughter. I feel like boys are just naturally taught to play rough, swing fast, aim high, climb up to the top of the monkey bars and jump off head first. Whereas we treat the girls a little bit more tenderly, telling them to be careful, don't get hurt. And I find it funny that people often point out, my daughter, how rough and tough she is, being such a tiny little girl, and how she'll be able to handle her own. And, while I 100% agree with each of those comments, it's just funny that nobody says that about her older brother, who is by far, more active than she. The third one I have on here, is finding a mentor. I've had, what we've called kind of like 2 formal mentors during my professional career, but I really think the most important mentor relationships I've created are the informal ones. I really recommend finding a mentor or a coach that's going to give you that honest feedback and support your decisions, one that's going to encourage and motivate you to do more. Try to find someone willing to set regular, say like monthly or quarterly check-ins, because until women are equally represented across all fields, I think it's going to be natural for some to have a little bit of anxiety as they settle into their career. But it doesn't have to be crippling. With support and with mentor and coaches, I think women can really thrive by connecting with mentors and just changing how they process their decision making and emotions. And another idea that has helped, I think, is building your strengths. We're not always going to be the best, but we can always be our best. And that's exactly what we should be bringing to the table. So try to identify your strengths and what we can bring or what you can bring to contribute. What for me, what I've come to realize is I don't have to be Superwoman and I don't have to be super powerful. For me, it's about building the relationships and trust and showing that you care. It's about delivering on my promises, focusing on my responsibilities. I have learned I don't have to be the loudest voice in the room. I don't have to be the largest shoe size or the one that everybody knows in the room. I have to be me and bring my strengths, and that's how I'm going to be successful and treated as that equal partner. So let's talk about being equal partners on the next page. To achieve that professional success that we're talking about, people, men and women, they need to voice opinions and advocate for their ideas while working in decision-making teams. So it's a problem if women are staying quiet, or men, anybody that's staying quiet. I love the quote, what difference does it make if you have a seat at the table if you don't effectively use it? Because that seat at that table, represents the voice that needs to be heard. It represents the voice that should be used to successfully influence others. Some women can struggle to get to the table, while others get to the table and then just experience challenges to maximize their voice there. So we need to make sure our voices are heard and that we can overcome our own obstacles. Some things that I've found that's kind of helped me with that whole, speaking up and let voice be heard is, just coming prepared, coming with knowledge to share or questions to gain more insight. A second one I'm throwing out there is be a credible source. Know your topic and certainly admit when you don't. Your audience is going to be expecting you to provide the most correct and reliable information so they can trust in your expertise. You might not always be right, but have a sound case for your opinion in those gray areas. This, I think, goes back to the topic of speak up. Don't be discouraged when other audience members have difference of opinions. You really don't know what's going to come out of further discussion and brainstorming. And that's what makes diverse teams so wonderful. Everyone having their own experience and their own ideas and opinions. It's not always just black and white, right and wrong. This third topic, handling conflict. I was going back and forth in my mind if I should include this topic or not, because I didn't want to imply that women handle conflict differently than men or that we need to improve on this topic. I decided to keep it here because I do think it's just a great professional reminder, when we're working with teams, and how you handle conflict really relates to how others respect you and how you can build confidence, and that's very important. Handling conflict, it doesn't mean being combative, nor does it mean constantly seeking to avoid conflict. When conflict pops up, try to be that forward-looking and positive voice. Stay calm and collected. Focus on the logic and the facts rather than the difference of opinions. The goal is, working to find that solution, especially in hard times, is really just a great leadership attribute to have. And the last one I have here is accept feedback, and not only accept it, but ask for it. If I want to be treated like an equal partner at the table, I need to be prepared to accept it no matter how critical it is. That's how we grow and improve ourselves. Certain people out there, I feel, can only offer positive feedback, and there's also those that only offer negative feedback. But try to find advice from that middle. I'm not saying look for that negative feedback by all means, but it is important to hear that honest feedback in order to grow. It may be uncomfortable to hear, but try to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So moving on to the next page, if I can leave you with any words of advice, because we did cover, we kind of threw out a lot of stuff in a short amount of time, it would really be to not let the perception of a male-dominated industry affect your potential for success or bring down your confidence. First, we have to overcome those internal barriers that we talked about before we can break through those external barriers. Build a support group. I mentioned female mentors, but it doesn't have to be. Just find someone or a group of people that will help you and support your success. And vice versa, I feel like I have to note on that to the females out there that have been successful, or even some that don't think they are, but in the eyes of others, they have achieved success. Reach out to those with less experience to help them not only develop, professionally, but also just understand that women have what it takes to succeed. And lastly, always speak up and engage with confidence. Remember, this confidence isn't going to happen overnight, but continue to push through those insecurities and self-doubt. This is what's going to be driving your success as an equal, confident partner at that table. So if you want to go to the next page, thank you all for having me here virtually today. I hope these slides and this discussions meant something to you. And I would, if you would ever like to reach out, share your stories, my contact information will be on the next slide. I would love to talk. But before we move to our panel and open it up for questions, I want to leave you with a few words from Theodore Roosevelt that when I was kind of reading and preparing for this presentation, I just thought it would be very fitting. I'm going to paraphrase it a bit from the slide. And you'll notice I'm also there's going to be a slight rendition to Teddy's words to make it fit a little bit better. It is not the critic who counts, not the woman who points out how the strong woman stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the woman who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred with dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if she fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that her place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither knew victory nor defeat. And so I hope you enjoyed that. That one really, hit home for me. So on this slide, you'll see my contact information. There's also a reminder for the book. There's so many different books out there. If you've read one, I would love to hear about it too. But this is one that's really just kind of helped with my foundation here.
Well, thank you for that, Nicole. That was wonderful. And for me, just really uplifting to hear. And I feel like anyone or everyone can take away something from that today. So we really appreciate you being here with us. We did get a couple questions or some comments in, and I'll just start with the comments first. Someone said, you made a good point that if we want more women at the table, we need to raise our daughters early so that they can, overcome those internal barriers and take risks. So just to kind of get them in that mindset early on and, break the mold and break the pattern that is really common in society today, but it's not something that's discussed. It's kind of like a unspoken rule that, boys are courageous and, like you said, girls are timid and ladylike. So I think it's amazing that you're doing that with your daughter as, an example. Another question we received, a little bit less focused on women in ag, but this person said they are a part of several Annie's projects, and from a survey they did, one of the biggest concerns is loss of a spouse. So what unique ways and what unique things have, I'm assuming Greenstone, have we done with wills and trust or durable powers to help protect what those families have worked hard for, in the case of a loss like that?
I wanted to kind of repeat what I just heard just to make sure I'm going to answer it the right way. But
okay.
Greenstone has done to kind of just help, from an estate planning standpoint, to help plan for it better, or if there was a tragic event, what we can do to help out.
Yes, and I think they're asking more as far as like if or how Greenstone is being proactive in that case. So yeah, like family planning, things like that.
I think, it's certainly a hard topic at times, especially for me, because it's just not a topic that we enjoy, talking about and planning for a death, or, an unlikely event. But there are a lot of the financial service officers really do try to engage with their customers and talk about plans and succession planning for retirement, but also for an untimely event. I think it's, we certainly have outside resources that we've used and that we've referred to get a professional, really involved. I think that's the most important part. So we do have some referrals out there that we can make. And then talk about, life insurance and planning in that case. Maybe we are wanting to try to keep everything within the farm, but be prepared for an untimely event and have security for the remaining family in case something were to happen. If you would like to get, kind of specifics, feel free to reach out. We can talk about specific resources available, but I do think it's a really important topic. But it, again, and I've seen it time and time again where something happens even at a very young age. And so it's really never too early to start, making plans and being prepared.
Yeah, well put. Another question came in, and I don't know if you know these stats off the top of your head, but they asked what percentage of the companies or members that you work with are female owned or led by females?
I cannot answer overall Greenstone. I would love to hear, the statistics on that. It's something I kind of had to cut out from a timing perspective. I removed it from my presentation, but I did want to kind of talk about that just amongst my customers that I work with. I do think it's a bit different because it's a different makeup of customers. They're much more, corporate-like. It's not so much family farms, husband and wife and husband type organizations. But out of my entire portfolio I work with, I have one customer that has a female chief financial officer. And so these companies I'm working with, that chief financial officer is a pretty large and important role in the business and planning and decision making. So that tells me a lot. But that's where there's some opportunity. And I don't think, and this is kind of going back to the teams that I've worked on in the past. It would be silly for anybody to think it's because men are just more suited for it or have more experience. I think it's evolution is going to take time to roll that over. But from an ownership standpoint, which is slightly different. So it's kind of behind, some of these are more behind the scenes, letting their management take over with ownership. I would say it's probably 40% probably have some type of female ownership in it. Again, it's your husband and wife operations and then maybe grown into the commercial lending group. They're still there. Wife is just as involved in the decision making, involved in every single meeting of mine. But it's more of the corporate life where I think that you start to see fewer females.
Okay, thanks for that. Let me double check that we don't get any more. So I did have one question for you. What is something, I know you talked a lot about different pieces of advice you hope the women today take away, but what is one piece of advice that you wish you had starting out 15 years ago or even in college that would have made it easier or at least given you more courage to tackle a lot of obstacles that maybe you put off for a while?
One.
What? Try to get one.
So what I wish I would have known or somebody would have told me. Let me expand a little bit on my background first. So like you had mentioned earlier, I did grow up around my family farm operation when I was younger, kind of in the Northeast Kansas, close to Kansas City, Missouri side. And growing up, I realized at that time, I wanted nothing to do with ag. I just didn't fit the mold. I wasn't the one out playing in the dirt. I was the one inside doing like something with numbers or reading. I was the one that family would make fun of on how I hopped over a fence, or I still remember to this day, they made fun of me because I called a dirt road a street one time. It just wasn't, somehow it missed my bloodline, I feel. And, you know, I moved to Michigan, went off to college, got into accounting, and, you know, come to find out, my first job was with Farm Credit, and I found my place. And so I guess my answer to your question is I wish I would have known that there's not just one in agriculture. You know, that you can find, you can contribute in different ways, and it doesn't have to be the one, you know, working the dirt. It doesn't have to be the one doing soil samples or, you know, being in the tractor. But there's other ways to be involved in ag, and mine happened to be more numbers driven. And so, like I said, I mean, 15 years later, I'm with Farm Credit, and, you know, it's still kind of the laughing joke of the family today that, you know, I was the one that wanted to get away from it all, and here I am.
Yeah, that's a fun story. So thank you for sharing that. If we have any more comments, or we did get one more question, so try to squeeze this one in. So they said their mother was always a CEO or president of family businesses. Do you think lack of women in that position has to do with how business is legally organized?
How it's legally organized? Is that what you said, Amber?
Maybe. Yes. Yep. Maybe we'll have them expand on that. Do you guys mean like as far as like an LLC, or they said S Corp?
You know, in my experience, I guess I've never, I don't think that there's too many, from my experience, that has been necessarily from a legal structure in any way. You know, there are some, you know, from a protective standpoint in LLCs where I see, you know, husband owning certain entities and wife owning other entities. But I really haven't seen that being like a driving force of really who's making the decisions. Whether it's a CFO or a CEO or just mom and dad, the legal structure I don't think should have any impact on, you know, who's ultimately the one running the show and making the decisions. But maybe if I didn't quite catch that question, I apologize.
I'm hoping that's what they were asking. But anyway, I think that wraps up the questions for you. I don't see any more coming in, but if you guys have more questions for Nicole, feel free to send them in. But for right now, we are going to turn it over to Melissa. She will introduce our panelists, and we welcome more questions to them. They all three have an awesome ag background and are happy to share their wisdom with you all today. So, Melissa.
All right, thank you. Well, while we're getting our panel set up, we're just gonna launch a poll here in just a second. So we're gonna want to know a little bit more about who's in our audience today for our panelists as they answer our questions. That would be helpful. So hopefully in a second, you'll be able to see the poll question pop up. And if that doesn't work, I can just stick it in the chat. Felicia's doing all of our tech today, so she's doing an awesome job. But while we're getting started, so we've got our panelists with us today. We've got Jennifer Lewis, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they will do a much superior job than I would. Amy Martin, and then Laura Braun as well. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this chat or this question into the chat here. So if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are. So we've listed some potential descriptions here. So if you're a producer or something like that, you could paste the producer, farmer, and grower option into the chat just so we can kind of get an idea of who's all with us today. Got some farmers and educators, local governments, high school ag teachers. Awesome. My husband was in agricultural education for a while as well. Very great. So we have, we got some other farmers and growers coming in. Awesome. So we have a great diversity in our audience today. So let's go ahead and get started. So Jennifer, you're the first one on my screen here. So if you could go ahead and just tell us a little bit about your role at your farm and some descriptions about your farm as well.
Sure. Well, thanks a lot for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Jennifer Lewis. I live on a dairy farm in Southeast Michigan in Hillsdale County with my husband, Bruce, and my two sons. Grown sons are here as well, working and helping to manage the farm. We have a dairy farm. We also raise row crops, raise the majority of our feed for the dairy cows. We also raise a lot of steers here. And because we do that, we also started a kind of like a small farm business selling beef directly from the farm. We also sell pork, dairy products, little gifty items. We are in the process right now of, we kind of started, I had a blueberry patch for 20 years. So we kind of started it there a few years ago. We then evolved into our farm office. We built that building about 2015, the year that we hosted breakfast on the farm. So that was a pretty busy year. And we've since added a small addition on to move the beef portion over to this little store. So separates the office. My job here at the farm is to run the office with my daughter-in-law. We have about 20 employees. So we stay pretty busy. And I also serve on the Michigan Farm Bureau Board of Directors for 5 counties in my district. And I serve as treasurer on a couple other local boards, 4-H Council and the Hillsdale County Dairy Promoters, as well as volunteer for lots of other things like many of you do. So thanks again for having me.
Great. Thank you for being here, Jennifer. Next is Amy. Amy, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your role on your farm.
There. Okay. Yep. I have a dairy farm in Osceola County. I'm only like 2 miles from Kettnan Center, if anybody knows where Kettnan Center is. I'm actually own the farm by myself. My brother left a year ago, so it's just me. And that can be a little scary when you have such a large operation by yourself all of a sudden. My 2 sons have finished Michigan State and got their education, and they are both back at the farm with me. My husband has an off-farm job. So we milk 500 cows. We farm about 1,700 acres, corn, alfalfa, strictly just for our own farm. I guess some of the things I'm involved in, Michigan Milk, on the advisory board, different committees. We do a lot of ag education here at our farm. We've done 27 years of Project Red at the farm with 4th graders. Except now this year, of course, with COVID, we have not. I was the first young farmer chairman that was female. Oh my gosh, that would have been back in 1997. And that put me on the Farm Bureau Board of Directors too. I'm not really sure. Besides farming, I'm on my local township. I've been on a school board. I don't know, a little bit of everything.
That's great. Thank you, Amy. Laura, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about your role as well?
Sure. I'm Laura Braun. I was born and raised in metropolitan Detroit, and 35 years ago, I married a widowed dairy farmer with 3 little girls. And we have evolved a lot in that period of time. My nest is now empty. We had 3 more children, so I raised a total of 6 children. And we're empty nesters now, and our farm operation has evolved from one that involved cattle and dairy cows to now we are strictly cash crops. And our youngest child, our son, has moved back into the operation and is helping us out now. We raise about 1,000 acres of corn, soybeans, and wheat in Ovid Township of Clinton County, and we have a little bit in Shiawassee County as well. I also am a director at Greenstone Farm Credit Services. I've been doing that for about 8 years. And in my role there, I have the tremendous opportunity to represent Greenstone at the Agribank District Farm Credit Council and also on the National Farm Credit Council, which really gets me out and meeting farmers from across the country, which has just been a fabulous experience. Excuse me. I also serve on the board of directors of Clinton County Farm Bureau. I'm the policy development chair, and I have formally served on the school board as well, and just always been active in my community, which I love.
Great. Thank you all for your introduction. So I have a couple of prepared questions that we can get started with, but for our audience members, if you have a question, please go ahead and enter that into the chat, and we'll be monitoring that as well so we can get your questions answered live by our panelists. So I'm a young woman in agriculture and a new mother, and one thing that I find myself struggling with is balance. And I know that's maybe some idealistic view, but what have you done or what have you found helpful to help you find balance between your personal life and your role in agriculture and on the farm? And if you want, I haven't picked anybody to go first, but if somebody wants to go first, go ahead and volunteer.
I can start.
Great, Laura.
I think, you know, from the very beginning, our family and our farm operation have been just joined together in such a way that you know, life balance and work balance is all kind of connected. And where everyone had roles, everybody participated, you know, all the children participated. I participated. I was a city girl. I learned how to milk cows and pick rocks and bale hay and did all those things, and also chief cook and bottle washer. And you know, everybody just chipped in, to the extent that my grown children and now talk about sending the grandchildren back to Camp Grammy and Papa so they can learn some work ethic and learn some of these things to do, because it was such a great thing for them growing up, and how much they appreciated the experience. And you know, the operation itself has evolved. Like I mentioned, you know, we used to raise calves, you know, 40, 50 some calves in hutches, and the kids would feed the calves. And when we ran out of kids, we didn't want to do that anymore. So we don't have cattle anymore. And just the operation has just evolved to make it so that life and work they just naturally balance themselves out. At least that's been our experience.
Yeah, Kristen asked a quick comment. Were your children involved in agricultural youth organizations like 4-H or FFA? Oh, Laura, you're muted again.
Repeat that, please.
Were your children involved in agricultural youth organizations?
Yes, they were all involved in 4-H. A couple of them were involved in FFA as well, and were chapter officers. My son has a degree from Michigan State in agribusiness management. So yes, they were all involved in some way. Awesome. And now we have our grandson is involved in 4-H and often keeps his calf here.
Very good. Amy, would you like to add anything else to that about balancing your farm life and your personal life?
I would. I feel very lucky, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to stay at the farm. When my kids were babies, little, they just go along for the ride. You know, they were 2 weeks old and they were sleeping in the milk house in cribs, and my nephews, and they just learned to adapt. They knew when to sleep. When you're milking, they're sleeping. They learned how to ride in the tractors and sleep in the tractors. And the kids just kind of learn how to adapt, but you kind of get the best of both worlds. You got to raise your kids yourself and do what you love to do, which was be around the animals. My kids were in 4-H too. So yeah, I'm a 4-H leader, and my kids are done with that obviously now, but yeah, a lot of busy years with school activities and 4-H.
Great. Jennifer?
Yeah, so pretty much, you know, the same. I was lucky enough to not have to work when my kids were very young. That is tricky for a lot of young people, especially you find that in these days, farming is tough, and being able to have both parents home working isn't always workable. And so a lot of, you know, I have lots of friends and lots of acquaintances that actually hold another job and also help out the husband on the weekends or whatever. So I know that's really difficult. Like I said, I was lucky enough to stay home with my kids. Just like Laura and Amy, my kids did everything. They worked on the farm. You know, they learned to take naps in the tractor and And I would go to we had a separate little building, a little 1930s Sears and Roebuck house in our backyard, and that was our office. And I would go out there, and the kids were in crib or, playpens, and I did my office work. I was lucky to have a flexible schedule like most moms. And so, yeah, it was juggling, of course, sometimes. And there is a balance that you have to try to find. Even now, my kids are all grown. I'm still working in the office and outside and doing things, 12 plus hours a day. I'm not sitting around watching TV. I always joked with my friends, oh, I'm just sitting here watching TV, eating my bonbons, but you don't do that. None of us do that. It doesn't matter if you're working outside or you're working in the office, there's plenty of stuff to do. So it is a juggling game. And when my kids were younger, there was a lot of that. And I certainly, understand that and hope that young mothers, you find that balance. And, sometimes the kids come first and work comes later. But, we've all been able to make it work, and, best of luck to all of you.
Thank you all for those questions. So I've got some more prepared questions I can go through, but please, again, audience, feel free to put some questions in the chat for our panelists. So our next question is, who inspired you to be the woman you are today? Amy, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. So I had to think about that for a little bit, because I think the three of us are a little older than you and maybe some of your other people. But, I graduated from high school in 1987 and college in 89. I did the dairy tech program, the 2-year program at Michigan State. Back then, there was two females in the dairy tech. Now today, almost everybody in the class is female. There wasn't any really role models. So I would have to say that I will give credit to both of my parents. My mom, because she worked on the farm, calves, finances, drove tractors, drove trucks. She still drives silage trucks when we're harvesting. And then I got to give some credit to my dad, because he did not treat me and my sister or my brother any differently. We were kids. You all worked the same. You all worked hard. It didn't matter. So I do have to give him credit for not treating us like little girls. He gave us the hammer and let us do whatever we wanted to in the workshop and drive any tractor and pick as many rocks as everybody else.
That's great that you had that leadership from your parents and that mentor ability there. I appreciated my parents, and I didn't share much about my background, but my family has a large landscape and then other agricultural enterprises in Florida. And my mom is out there working just as hard and sometimes harder than my dad. So I appreciate your comments there, Amy. So Jennifer, would you like to go next?
Sure. I too had to think about that. I'm older than Amy, but I looked back at when I grew up. So I grew up with a handicapped brother, and I grew up on a small farm. So the work wasn't really equal. I did a lot more than my brother did. And that was okay. That was all right, because I needed to do that. And I always said, and I have to laugh when Nicole said this about not wanting to be in agriculture. I didn't either. I said, I will never marry a farmer. But, things change and you meet the right person. And I think, my point is, growing up with a handicapped brother, I felt that I needed to be someone who stood up for those people and protected him to an extent. And we all know that agriculture is 2% of the population or less than that. And I think that, we need people to stand up, and we need people to talk about it, and we need people to be champions for that. And not that I am, but I try. And I think, that kind of helped to lead me to where I am today, and the type of person that leaders, and not really one specifically, but different leaders who were good role models and good examples of of a person to be, to work with young children and young adults. And I was a 4-H leader for over 16 years. And I think that was the greatest joy, was being someone that maybe they looked up to, trying to steer them into a leadership type position in a 4-H club. And then I did have a few high school teachers that I just really enjoyed being around. I enjoyed the things that they said and the teaching that they tried to do or did, not tried. And, I think people like that really influence you at a young age. And I think, so those were all people that did that. And my parents too. Your parents do have a little bit of a role in shaping you. And, some of us are born more of leaders and some of us aren't. And my children are no exception. I have 3 children. They're not as involved in agriculture type things as my husband and I. Sometimes you see that, but I have a daughter-in-law who, my 2 boys and my daughter-in-law all went to Michigan State, did the 2-year ag tech program. And as they age, I can see that leadership quality coming out in them. So it isn't something that just jumps out at you when you're 20 years old. You will grow into it. And I think just remember that and, do the best that you can and push forward.
Great. Thank you for that, Jennifer. I appreciate your points that you made there. Laura?
Yeah, I don't think there has been just one person that I would think of as a role model, but a combination of many people throughout my life, starting with my grandmother who immigrated from Denmark, and the struggles and the risks that she took, and that whole side of the family, the things that they did, right on down through employers and coworkers, and whoa, shut up. And even my children, as they've grown up, have become, people that I look up to, and the choices that they make and the struggles that they've been through, and I, how much I admire what they've done. And I even think back to some of the people that I've known in my lifetime who have taught me how I don't want to be, how I don't want to treat others, and how I don't want to live outside of my integrity. That I'm not going to go on to in a lot of detail about each one of those people, but it's just a combination of all of the people that I've met in my life. If you pay attention to the people that you meet, there's a reason why you meet them. There's a reason why they're in your life. And if you pay attention, there's always something to learn.
That's a great point. I know Nicole talked about conflict, and we've all faced conflict, and I think your point is well taken, that sometimes you have those more negative influences that might come into your life, but figuring out how you can spin that into something positive is a very important point. So we had a question come into the chat that kind of mirrors one of the prepared questions that I have. So I'm going to kind of morph it a little bit and take liberty from both questions. So kind of if you can describe a struggle that you had, and I know each of you in your introduction talked about how your farm has changed. So maybe a struggle related to the farm and thinking about those changes over the years and kind of how you overcame those struggles. So I don't know who would like to go first, but I know, Amy, you kind of talked about the recent switch with your brother leaving. So I don't know if maybe that's something that you could answer this question about.
Sure. And this kind of, I'll try to keep it not super long. We've had some real struggles at our farm the last 7-8 years. Here in the dairy industry, you kind of, our struggles. We decided to make a big farm change and expand 2012. It went really bad, really fast, and it was kind of out of our hands. And I actually sued an international company, and it went to federal court. And being female, and when you sit across the tables from their high-paid lawyers for 10 hours being depositioned, and against the president of the company that flies over here from Europe and tries to intimidate you, it's kind of terrifying. But you just stand up for yourself because you're confident in that you are right. And you can't let other people try to intimidate you, no matter how powerful they think that they are. Because ultimately, me, the small farmer, won. And those people are no longer in the positions that they were in. So that makes you feel good. So don't let people intimidate you when you are in the right. Just know your story, be confident, know what you're talking about, and don't try to be more than you are. Don't have you don't have something to prove. Just because we're female doesn't mean that we have to prove that we're going to be better than somebody else. We just need to be ourselves. So when we got through that, which was really tough, my brother has terrible back issues, and he came to me a year ago on 4th of July with tears in his eyes and said, I can't do this anymore. He says, I got to quit. And that was really hard for both of us because we're really close. And, you know, then you kind of we had a contract. But then you still have to negotiate out a deal because at the end of the day, you still want to be family. And it's been over a year, just over a year. We're in a really good spot with each other. You know, me and my kids are made some changes, trying to refocus the management and who covers what areas. You know, it threw my kids in really quick into management positions. So we're trying to work through that. But get some contracts. If you are in partnership with anybody, have your ducks in a row. You know, have some wills, have some written contracts, because no matter how good a family you think you are, you're not that good when it comes down to talking about money.
Yeah, that's, Laura, did you have something to contribute?
Oh, I just said, no way that you need to have those contracts. And I guess, you know, my story is similar to that, you know, you need to have things in writing. My husband and I had been married for 8 years. We had 6 kids, you know, my son was 2. And sometimes there's just too many sons on a generational farm. And so we chose to leave the family farm in Huron County, and we moved halfway across the state and started over.
Wow.
You know, we left, we sold everything, sold the cows that were ours, packed it up. We looked like the Beverly Hillbillies moving across state. And, you know, you're panicking about, what do we do without a milk check? How's that going to work? How are we going to be able to pick this up and start from scratch? And it was quite a deal. But at the end of the day, the fact that my father-in-law had a partnership agreement with his sons, with both of them, and then we were able to actually sell our share out to my husband's brother, and we were able to start over again. We had a little bit of cash, bought some ragtag equipment at auction to get started. The way we found our place was like, there was no online real estate at that. There's no, you know, Zillow on online or anything back in the early 90s. And so, you know, I called Century 21, and because they had statewide listings, and Real Estate One, you have statewide listings. I said, we need something with acreage south of US 10 and west of I-75. It has to have a house big enough for 8 people, and some outbuildings would be great. And the realtor found us this wonderful location in Ovid, 30 miles north of Lansing, and we moved into the community, went to church the day after we moved in, and it was the first time in my married life that I felt like a cohesive family, where everybody looked at us like, look at this family with all these kids. And it was really just a great place to land. And obviously it worked out. We worked hard and it worked out.
Wow, thank you, Laura. That's very powerful, and thank you for your transparency there. So Jennifer, would you like to go next?
Sure. So we have, you know, right around 20 employees. And so we've had lots of issues over the years, lots of labor related issues. I don't know how many on here actually have employees, but we've had employee romances that have gone south. We've had a little bit of fighting before. We've had a little bit of discrimination going on. The majority of those people lost their jobs because of it. you know, we are an equal opportunity employer, and we have women here as well as men, and, you know, stand up for each and every one of them. So if you do something bad, you probably won't have a job. We've also been through a partnership breakup. Back in about 2001, my husband's partner came to him and said, you know what, I'm leaving. I don't want to do this anymore. And that was about the third or fourth time he said that. And my husband said, fine. So we all went through that crazy time, and it is really, I've never been divorced, but I would imagine it's pretty close to that. Nobody comes out a winner. It's pretty rough on everybody, whether it's the choice that you need to make or a choice that you want to make. It's not fun. So, you know, we lived through that. It was tough. It was a two and a half year event, I guess I want to say. In the end, you know, we came out better and stronger, and that's what you hope for. We've also been through a barn fire that destroyed a milk parlor. And this didn't happen too awful long ago. We were renting another farm, and basically just had milk cows there, and the parlor burned one night, and we had to move all those cows home, and that created a lot of issues for several weeks until we got everything smoothed out and were able to get back into a normal routine and culled a lot of cows. Luckily, we didn't lose any cows. But, you know, it's always been working with people and knowing the people that you have and how you can best manage them to help you through these things. We have, you know, several employees that have been with us for 20 plus years. We learn to treat our employees very good. We treat them almost like family. We give them birthday cards. We have a Christmas party. We cook a lot for them, you know, during spring and fall and half the summer too, I feel like, except for last year, we had to kind of put the kibosh on that a little bit, but so we do a lot of extra things for employees. So there's a lot of lessons that we've learned and many different challenges that we've had. And so if anybody needs any specific information, you can certainly contact me later on that.
Thanks for that, Jennifer. And I think this really ties into one of the questions that was posed earlier in the chat, and you all sort of hinted at some parts of this, but one of the comment that came in was specifically that they had gone to Annie's project in the past, and one of the big concerns was the loss of a spouse or those transitions that might happen. So what did you do specifically with the wills and those partnership agreements or the trust that helped protect you and what you and your families have worked so hard for?
I guess I'll start. For us. We had an agreement when, so I've never lost a spouse. It's hard to talk about that. I know that's a very challenging situation for a lot of people. And certainly my heart goes out to any of you that have had that happen. We have tried to set ourselves up with, we have wills, we have a living trust, we have LLCs to help protect different aspects of our farming operation. I've not attended an Annie's project before. My daughter-in-law has, and she got a lot of good out of it. We also have a lot of life insurance. And I think even at a young age, my husband and I were just married and immediately got life insurance. He'd already had it. I had not. I know, a few stories where the spouse has died and the wife, the only way she made it was life insurance. And I know with Greenstone, obviously they're going to encourage you to do that. But that is probably one of your better options to help protect what you have invested in your operation to help you get through that really challenging time. And all of those are parts of it, but life insurance may be one of the most important ones.
Great, thank you. Amy or Laura, is there anything you would like to contribute?
Sure. We are a corporation and we have our land in an LLC, which I am the sole owner of the land. My parents still each own 45% of the corporation, and I bought my brother's 45% out. So I now own 90% of the corporation. We are very specific in the write-up of the corporation on what's to happen in case, because my husband works off the farm. So in case of divorce, death, I want to make sure that my sons are 25 and 31, and I want to make sure that they're not in a bad position since I am the only farm owner. Basically, I have a lot of life insurance. So if something was to happen to me, they would be in a pretty good position that they could survive without struggling too hard. So get a good financial advisor and a good lawyer to write you up some good contracts.
Good advice. Laura?
I don't really have a lot to add to this other than the fact that it's important to make those arrangements and to keep them up to date because things change. You're not, the children are no longer little, but okay, now my son works with us. So we have to include something different in the way the estate is planned. A long time ago when we first became Farm Bureau members and we were at a young farmer event, and there was one workshop just for women, and it talked about these are the people who you need to know. You need to have a relationship with a lawyer. You need to have, you personally as the woman on the farm, you need to have a relationship with the accountant. And there was another one, and I was trying to think of what it was right off the top of my head, but those professional, your banker, your loan officer, you need to have a relationship yourself with these people in case something does happen, divorce or death, and you're having to face this on your own and you don't know who the lawyer is. You need to have that information. You don't have a relationship with your loan officer, you need to go in the office and visit, and get to know them. Greenstone's great about having relationships with their customers, just a plug. But anyway, yeah, I guess that's all I have to add is to, have those relationships on your own and keep everything up to date.
That's great. So
I do have something I'd like to add.
Yeah.
Because I've helped, my grandparents both passed away in the last couple of years, so I've kind of helped settle their estate. So I kind of understand how some of this goes. You need to make sure that somebody besides me or whoever else does a lot of the financial understands where everything is. You need to know where all the insurance, all the passwords. So my daughter-in-law was over a few weeks ago and I showed her everything. I'm like, these are the files. Here are my passwords. Somebody besides me needs to know. So don't be afraid to let somebody else know where all your private information is, because someday they're going to struggle if they have to have it.
Yeah, it's a great, excellent point. And Nicole added a comment in here that was agreeing with the points that our panelists had made, and that it's important to not just have relationships, but to understand and have a role in drafting those and being involved with that to make sure that you're covered and you understand if some tragic event happens, what exactly you need to do. And Amy, that's a great point about knowing where the passwords are and all of those small things that slip your mind. I think a lot of times we all get so caught up in our day-to-day that we stop and we don't stop and think about some of these worst case scenarios of what can happen and making sure that we're prepared for that day. We all just kind of take a minute. We need to stop plowing forward and take a minute and pause it and do some of those reflective activities. So that's an awesome point. And one of the other questions we had, and you all have answered this, I think, exceptionally well, was about resources and things that have events or people that have helped you along the way. I've heard so far, 4-H and FFA, so people in your community. I've heard loan officers, lawyers, your family. Are there other resources that you've found particularly helpful throughout your career?
I guess I would say, attending some of those conferences that are put on by various ag organizations. Farm Bureau puts on some, I've been to some dairy conferences and not just local. We flew to Vegas years ago for a conference. Sometimes those larger conferences are interesting because you're not with your peers, you're with other people throughout the country and you see lots of different things. So those are interesting. And Laura mentioned that about one of the committees that she's on where she meets people from across the country. I think those are, those are other things that, that have helped shape you and make you think about what it is you're doing, where you're heading, those types of things. So, yeah.
Awesome. Amy or Laura, was there any? Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, I agree. Of course, that's how I know Jennifer is through many of these. Be involved. You might think that you don't have time, but be involved. Be on a committee, Farm Bureau, Michigan Milk, whatever it might be. Because I think that most of the progressive, successful farms are at these meetings because you're open to new ideas. You're not just stuck in your own property. When we looked at expanding our farm, we traveled out of state to see barn designs, parlor designs, etc. Because Michigan is such a peninsula that technology doesn't necessarily just filter across the state line. So you need to go and talk to other people and expand.
That's a great point. And I think that relates back to some of those risks that Nicole was talking about taking earlier. So I never really thought about Michigan being isolated from other states. I also grew up in the other peninsula of Florida. So I guess I'm just used to that security of the water there around us. But that's great. Laura, did you have any other resources that have been helpful to you?
I just agree with both of what Jen and Amy said. You need to get off the farm. It's easy to be isolated. It's easy to stay on the farm and to talk yourself into thinking, I can't leave, I have to get the work done. But it's really mind expanding in a multiple of ways to get off the farm and meet other people, whether they are actually, even if they're not even farmers, and just see how the rest of the world lives. It just makes you a much richer person and do what you can to get off the farm a little bit. It'll make your work when you come back that much better.
Great. Let's see, we had one other thing. So we had just a comment that the panelists are saying, get involved, and as young as you can, get involved, and your network will grow exponentially. So that's a great point, and it sounds like all of our panelists have done a great job throughout their careers of really expanding their network and taking, but also giving back to that network as well, from what we can tell. So we're getting a little bit short on time. So I wanted to have our wrap up question, which actually Becca also posed in the chat, and I kind of like the way that she put it. So what is one piece of advice that you would give your 20-year-old self?
I would definitely say set goals. Sometimes you don't think about it. It doesn't matter if you're 20 or you're 50. You should be looking down the road. You should be setting some type of goals for yourself. They don't have to be set in stone. You don't have to write them down. But I think having something in your mind of where I want to be in the next even 5 years, maybe where I want to be in a year. For us, building this little store was a kind of a little vision of, I'm going to set a goal. We've done well. Let's move on, take another step, and absolutely ask for help. I think this is a really good format for maybe not asking, but getting some information. Trying to figure out what other people have done to be somewhat successful, and I think for me it's definitely just set goals.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Laura, would you like to go next? Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. She was muted. I guess I would have to say, because, back when we were that age, farming was not that popular for us. I had a lot of peer pressure, even in high school and early into college, that going back to the farm was not the cool thing to do. I was told by one of my teachers in high school that I was wasting my brain if I was going to go back to the farm. My girlfriends in school, it wasn't the cool thing to do. So you lose some friends. The funny thing is today, they all think that what I do is pretty cool, and they all bring their kids to the farm. Back then, it wasn't so cool. So just be yourself. Just be yourself, do what you do, and be happy.
That's awesome feedback. Thank you, Amy. Laura?
Well, first of all, I really struggle to remember my 20-year-old self, except for the fact that I had no idea I would be a farmer at that point. It was not even on the horizon. And so here I am, and I kind of chuckle looking back on that. But I think about, you know, when I was that age and how young I was and how insecure I felt and how you know, how I lacked confidence at that age. And I wish I could have told myself then, you know, you have everything you need inside yourself. You have everything that it takes. You know, there's no reason why you can't succeed at being who you are. And no matter what you do, whether you remain in agriculture or you come to it as a city girl, you have everything you need within yourself.
That's great. So I just want to take a minute to say thank you so much to our keynote speaker, Nicole, and to our three panelists, Amy, Jennifer, and Laura. I have been inspired today, and I hope that this session has inspired all of you to go out there and take that seat at that table with confidence. So thank you so much, and we look forward to engaging with you further as we grow this series. So I hope you all have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you.